She stopped speaking long before she stopped ruling, not out of weakness, but because she believed words could kill her. Christina of Sweden was born into a world already expecting her voice. She was the only surviving child of King Gustavus Adolphus, the Lion of the North, and from the moment she screamed in her cradle, the court decided what that voice should become: a king's voice, a warrior's voice, a Protestant saviour's voice. They raised her like a son, dressed her in armour, drilled her in philosophy and war, told her she would rule a nation forged in blood and winter. But they forgot one thing. A voice forced upon you is not a voice you own. Even as a child, Christina understood this. She understood it far too well. She was bright, terrifyingly so, with eyes that startled her tutors and a mind that raced faster than any conversation she was forced into. She studied language as if it were a weapon. She dissected rhetoric as if it were a corpse. And the more she learned, the more she feared something no one else in the palace dared to consider, that every word spoken is a blade, and every word heard is a wound. Her diaries, the ones she burned but never completely destroyed, reveal traces of this terror. Speech is not breath. Speech is burden. Words fall with weight, too much weight. A sentence can crush a soul, even my own. And so, even as a girl, she hesitated before she spoke. A pause, a breath caught between teeth, a silence held just a heartbeat too long. The court praised it as gravitas, as royal composure. But Christina knew better. She was afraid of the sound of herself. The first public silence happened during a council meeting when she was 15. A minister disagreed with her interpretation of Roman history. Small, harmless, inconsequential. Christina raised her hand to respond, but when she opened her mouth, nothing came out. Her throat tightened. Her lungs froze. Her tongue felt like stone, and in the space where her voice should have been, she felt something she could never admit. A crushing pressure inside her chest, as if the words she wanted to speak had weight enough to break her ribs. The council waited. She stared at the table, palms trembling beneath her gloves. Finally she whispered, "I cannot." No one understood what she meant. They assumed she meant she couldn't recall the passage, or couldn't articulate her argument. But Christina knew exactly what she meant. She could not survive the weight of words. From then on, the court noticed something strange. The Queen spoke less, and less, and less. At first it was subtle. Truncated answers, gestures instead of sentences, long pauses that stretched into silence. Then it became intentional. She stopped responding to minor courtiers, stopped acknowledging compliments, stopped answering questions unless absolutely necessary. And when forced to reply, she spoke in a voice so soft, so brittle. The councillors leaned forward in fear of missing a syllable. But the truth they never realised was this: Christina wasn't losing her voice, she was killing it. On purpose. She believed something dangerous, something unspoken, was trapped inside her. And if she spoke too freely, if she let words escape without restraint, if she allowed her voice to fill a room, that dangerous thing would escape with it. Her silence became her armour, her cage, her confession. And as shadows lengthened across the frozen courtyards of Stockholm, Christina of Sweden began the slow, deliberate act of erasing her voice from the world, before the world could use it against her. Part 2, the court that feared her silence. Silence is unsettling in a royal court. Courtiers expect words, sharp ones, sweet ones, poisonous ones. Words are currency. Words are weapons. Words decide wars, marriages, and the fate of nations. But Christina of Sweden began taking those weapons away. One winter morning, as frost glazed the palace windows like thin white bones, the council convened to discuss taxation. They spoke, argued, gestured. Papers rustled. Voices clashed like swords. Christina listened. Eyes focused. Jaw clenched, composed as marble. Finally, a minister turned to her and asked for her ruling. The room fell silent. Christina didn't answer. Not a word. Not a breath of intention. She simply stared, as if the question had been asked in a language she did not recognize. "Your Majesty," the minister repeated. Still nothing. The councillors shifted uneasily. A queen refusing to speak was more frightening than a queen shouting. When she finally lifted her hand, it was not to speak, but to push the parchments away. Her gesture was a verdict. Her silence had more authority than their voices. The entire room realized something terrible. A monarch who refuses to speak becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability is the most dangerous form of power. Within weeks, the court began to fracture around her wordlessness. Rumours swelled like disease. She is sick. She is possessed. She is mourning something she refuses to name. She has taken a vow. She's lost her mind. But the truth was far stranger. Christina had developed a belief, one she told no one, not even her closest ladies, that every spoken word left a mark on the body. A bruise on the ribs, a strain on the spine, a weight on the shoulders, and too many words could break a person entirely. She once confided to her personal confessor, "I feel them piling in my bones, the unspoken sentences." He asked what she meant. Christina only closed her eyes and whispered, "If I speak freely, I will shatter." Her silence spread like frost over the palace. She refused greetings, ignored flattery, dismissed arguments with a raised finger instead of a spoken decree. Ambassadors from France, Denmark, England, and the Holy Roman Empire travelled hours, sometimes weeks, to hear her speak. She said nothing. They returned home whispering that the Queen of Sweden ruled with a silence sharper than any king's speech. To her critics, she was unstable. To her supporters, she was brilliant. To her enemies, she was terrifying. Because silence cannot be predicted, silence cannot be bribed, silence cannot be overheard by scheming ears. In the absence of words, courtiers began to sense their own fears reflected back at them. But silence has a cost. Late at night, when candles burned low in the icy corridors, Christina felt it. The weight of thousands of swallowed words pressing on her ribs, tightening around her heart, threatening to crack her from within. She paced in circles, hands trembling against her throat. She wanted to scream, wanted to speak, wanted to release the pressure that built inside her like steam inside an iron chamber. But she couldn't. Not because she'd lost her voice, but because she believed her voice had become dangerous. Some nights, she felt it move inside her. A pressure, a heat, a presence. Not a metaphor, not an emotion. A thing that wanted to escape through her mouth. And in the candlelit dark, Christina of Sweden began to fear a truth more horrifying than madness. Her silence wasn't protecting her from the world. It was protecting the world from her. Part 3. The Weight of Unsaid Things. Silence can protect a monarch, but it can also suffocate her. In the third year of Christina's self-imposed wordlessness, Stockholm began to notice something strange about their queen. Not the silence itself, they had grown accustomed to that. But the way she moved, as if the air were heavier around her, as if each step cost her a breath, as if she carried something no one else could see. Her ladies observed her carefully. They saw how she pressed her palms into her ribs while walking the corridors, how she paused mid-stride as if adjusting an invisible burden, how she arched her shoulders forward like someone trying to keep weight from slipping down her spine. Only one lady, the boldest, dared to ask, "Majesty, are you in pain?" Christina didn't answer. She only looked up with hollowed eyes, exhaled sharply through her nose and resumed walking. But when she passed a tall mirror, one of the few she had not ordered removed, she stopped. She stared into her own reflection, not at her face, not at her gown, not at the crown she refused to wear, but at her chest, as if studying the pressure inside it. Her lips parted for the briefest moment, a breath of a breath, a flicker of a word that never became sound. Then she snapped her mouth shut, jaw tightening so hard the ladies heard her teeth scrape. The moment passed. She walked on. But they whispered afterward that they had seen something in her eyes. Fear. Not of others. Not of power. Not of silence. Fear of what might escape if she spoke. At night, Christina took to writing. Not letters, not decrees, not even journal entries. She wrote lists, pages and pages of words she refused to say aloud. Anger, betrayal, mother-father, body confession, forgive, touch, crush, burn, desire, sin, woman-man choice, voice, love, freedom, escape me. Her quill carved grooves in the parchment, as if the writing itself required strength. When finished, she folded each sheet carefully and locked it away. Her confessor once found a page she dropped. Unspoken words are heavier than stones. I carry mountains inside my ribs. When he asked what she meant, her eyes shimmered with a strange clarity, the clarity of someone living inside both truth and delusion. Christina touched her chest lightly, almost tenderly, and whispered, "They grow." And then came the morning that terrified the court more than any silence ever had. A nobleman challenged her on a matter of succession, loudly, arrogantly, certain the Queen's quietness made her weak. He demanded, "Your Majesty, answer plainly. Will you marry or will you doom Sweden without an heir?" Christina looked at him, calmly, coldly, with a stillness that made even the guards tighten their grips on their halberds. She drew in a breath, too deep, too long, as if preparing to speak. The entire council leaned forward. Her mouth opened, and then it happened. A sound escaped her, but not a word. A broken, choking gasp, as if she had tried to lift something far too heavy for her lungs. She clutched her throat, eyes wide with panic. Her ladies rushed to her side. The councillors recoiled as if witnessing a possession. Christina staggered back. Her voice caught again, raw and strangled. The noble who had provoked her turned pale, suddenly realizing she wasn't refusing to speak out of defiance. She genuinely believed she couldn't. When she finally caught her breath, she looked at the council with a terror that didn't belong on a queen's face. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She didn't speak. She simply touched her sternum, fingertips trembling, as though checking for cracks. Later that night, her confessor wrote, "Her silence is no longer a habit. It is a condition." But Christina knew the truth he could not put into words. She wasn't losing her ability to speak. She was losing the ability to contain what speaking would unleash, and the palace began to wonder, if a monarch cannot speak, who or what is ruling in her silence? Part 4. When silence turned against her. Silence, once chosen, eventually chooses you back. By the time Christina reached her late 20s, the court no longer asked when the Queen would speak again. They asked what she was becoming instead. She ruled through gestures, glances, notes passed through trembling hands. Decrees bore her seal, but not her voice. Judgments were delivered in ink, never sound. And yet, the weight inside her did not lessen. It grew. Christina began waking in the night with the sensation that something heavy sat on her chest, not pressing down, but settling in, as if finding a permanent place. She would sit upright in bed, gasping, clutching her ribs, convinced she could feel words shifting inside her body like stones in a sack. Her ladies heard her pacing until dawn. They heard her breathing, fast, shallow, controlled. The breath of someone holding back a scream, not because she was afraid to make noise, but because she believed the scream would break her apart. One night, she pressed her ear to the stone wall of her chamber and remained there for nearly an hour. When asked what she was listening for, she finally answered, barely audible, scraped raw from disuse, "To see if the walls can hear what I won't say." Her body began to betray her mind. Christina's shoulders curved inward. Her gait stiffened. She walked as though compensating for an invisible burden strapped to her torso. Physicians examined her and found nothing. No injury, no disease. They prescribed rest, warmth, prayer. None of it helped. Because this was not a sickness of flesh. It was a sickness of containment. Christina believed, with terrifying certainty, that the words she swallowed were condensing. That silence was not empty, but dense. That every unsaid truth added pressure to something already cracking inside her. And worst of all, she began to fear that if she spoke now, she wouldn't release words. She would release everything. The court noticed the change before she admitted it to herself. Her silences were no longer calm. They were strained, fragile. Ministers learned to watch her hands during councils. When her fingers curled inward, nails digging into her palms, they knew to stop speaking. When her jaw tightened, when her throat flexed as if swallowing something sharp, they knew she was close. Close to what, no one could say. One afternoon, alone in the gallery, Christina stood before a massive window overlooking the frozen courtyard. Her breath fogged the glass. She lifted a hand. For a moment she intended to speak. Just one word. Something small. Something harmless. But the moment she imagined the sound leaving her mouth, pain bloomed across her chest. Sharp, sudden, undeniable. She doubled over. Not metaphorical pain. Real pain. Her ribs ached as if compressed. Her lungs burned. She whispered to herself, not aloud but inside, "This is what words do." Tears slid down her face, silent and furious. In that moment, Christina made a decision that would end her reign. If speaking could destroy her, and silence was already killing her slowly, then the throne itself was the weight she could no longer carry. She began drafting her abdication in secret, not with advisers, not with ministers, alone. Each word cost her hours, each sentence written as if carving bone. She did not sign it immediately. She stared at the parchment for nights on end, fingers hovering above her name, knowing that once she released this final truth into the world, there would be no silence strong enough to protect her again. The crown had demanded her voice. She had answered with silence. Now the silence demanded something in return, and Christina of Sweden, queen by birth and prisoner by belief, prepared to surrender the one thing she had never truly owned, her crown. Part 5. The day she chose silence over a crown. The abdication was announced on a winter morning so cold the air itself seemed brittle. Christina stood before the assembled court not as a monarch, but as a woman stripped of every illusion that had once sustained her. The crown rested on a cushion beside her, gold, heavy, immaculate, a perfect symbol of everything that had crushed her slowly and without mercy. For the first time in years, the court expected her to speak. They leaned forward, held their breath, waited for the sound they had been denied for so long. Christina did not give it to them. Instead, she placed one hand on the parchment of abdication and the other against her chest, not ceremonially, but instinctively, as if bracing herself against a pressure that never truly left her. Her lips parted. A sound almost emerged, and then she stopped. Because in that final moment, Christina understood something with absolute clarity. If she spoke now, it would not be a farewell. It would be a collapse. Words would not leave her mouth as language. They would leave her as weight. Years of restraint, identity denied, faith questioned, desires forbidden, truths compressed until they became unbearable. So she closed her mouth, and with a steady hand she signed her name. The scrape of quill on parchment echoed louder than any speech she could have given. The crown was lifted away, not torn from her head, but released. After that day, Christina changed. She travelled. She abandoned the rigid expectations of Sweden. She crossed borders, religions, identities. And when people finally heard her speak again, years later, far from the throne, they said her voice was low, deliberate, almost cautious, as if she were still measuring the weight of every syllable before allowing it into the world. But those closest to her noticed something else. She spoke only when necessary, never carelessly, never freely, because some silences, once lived inside long enough, never truly leave. Christina of Sweden was not destroyed by madness. She was not broken by weakness. She was not silenced by others. She made a choice. Between a crown that demanded her voice and a body that could no longer bear it, she chose survival. And perhaps that is the most unsettling truth of all. That power does not always take something from us violently. Sometimes it simply waits, until silence feels safer than speech. In the end, Christina did not lose her voice. She learned exactly how dangerous it could be, and decided the world was not worthy of its weight.